A homeless man found a wallet filled with a large amount of money and returned it to its owner. The wealthy man handed him the keys to an abandoned house deep in the countryside, with a condescending smirk on his face. "If you can manage it, live there." The knife-sharp wind of November seeped through Victor's thin coat, but he felt the real cold in that familiar phantom ache in his right leg. It was the ghost pain of a limb no longer there, echoing in severed nerve endings. Victor slumped on the concrete steps of the city's abandoned, graffiti-covered old opera house, trying to loosen the strap on his prosthetic leg. This cheap, government-issued plastic piece, now too loose for his shrinking leg, gnawed at his flesh like sandpaper with every step. He was once the man who shaped the skyline of this city. Victor, who calculated the structural integrity of steel and glass towers in his mind like a chess master. Now he was a limping silhouette living in the city's underbelly, someone people avoided looking at. 2 years. Only 2 years had passed since that damned construction accident and Julian's betrayal. Victor had left his leg under the rubble, while Julian Blackwood had built his empire on top of it. Victor pulled the stale sandwich from his pocket, with fingers numb from the cold. Elena, she was always on his mind. She was the one holding his hand when Victor woke up in the hospital bed, a bandaged void where his leg should have been. But the debts, the lawsuits, and the dark pit Victor had fallen into, Elena had lasted 6 months. "I'll do anything with you, Victor, but I won't do anything with a man who feels sorry for himself," she had said as she left. Just then, something the wind had swept along the sidewalk hit the tip of his metal cane. A dark, leather wallet. Victor looked around, feeling a tightness in his chest. No one was there. Bending over was no simple movement for him. It was a battle for balance. He braced his right hand against the wall, shifted his weight onto his good leg, and gritting his teeth, reached down. The wallet was heavy. Its bulge screamed of its contents. With trembling fingers he opened it. Green stacks of bills, platinum credit cards, and that familiar embossed logo. Apex Tower, Julian Blackwood, CEO. This was the moment fate spat in Victor's face. Julian Blackwood. Victor's childhood friend who disabled the security systems Victor had designed and embezzled money, who on the day of the accident sent Victor to that collapsing pier by saying, "I took care of the security protocols." Victor clutched his wallet tightly. The money inside could keep him in a warm bed for months. He could get a new, properly fitting prosthesis. But inside him, beyond his engineer's logic, a stubborn shred of pride rebelled. He wasn't the thief. The thief was the man in that plaza. Victor would not be a thief. The revolving doors of the Apex Tower gleamed before Victor like the entrance to a spaceship. The marble floor in the lobby was so polished that Victor feared his cane would slip with every step. As the security guard in a suit looked at Victor's dirty parka and creaking prosthesis and was about to block his way, Victor held up his wallet. "For Julian Blackwood. Personal." The security guard hesitated when he saw the quality of the wallet and the logo on it. After a brief phone call, the elevators opened. 50th floor. Julian's office resembled a temple overlooking the city. When Victor entered, Julian was watching the city from in front of the massive glass wall. He hadn't changed at all. He was just dressed more expensively. "Victor." Julian turned around. His face showed not surprise but a mixture of disgust and curiosity, as if looking at an insect. "When security said a homeless person had come, I never imagined it would be you, although technically, the description is correct." Victor placed his wallet on the mahogany table. "You dropped it." Julian took the wallet without even looking inside. "You could have taken everything. Why didn't you?" Conscience? Or is it still that stupid pride of yours? He circled the table and approached Victor. His eyes caught the bulge of the prosthesis under Victor's pants. Are you still using that cheap thing? You can hear it squeaking in the hallway. Victor's jaw clenched. He gripped his cane so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I don't need your money, Julian. I just wanted to prove to myself that I haven't sunk to your level. Julian laughed. It was a cold, joyless laugh. Level? Victor, you're at rock bottom. Listen to what I'm going to tell you. I'll reward your honesty. I won't give you money, no. You'd just waste it. He pulled a rusty, antique-looking set of keys from his drawer and slid them across the table in front of Victor. Hollow Creek, an old property up north, where civilization ends. It was my grandmother's. No one's been there in years. It has a roof, it has walls. Perfect hiding place for a broken man like you. Julian emphasized the word. Take this. If you don't freeze to death there in the winter, maybe you'll build yourself a new life. If you can manage it, live there. Victor looked at the keys. He felt the cold metal on his fingertips. Hollow Creek. A forgotten place hard to find even on a map. But it was better than the stifling air of this office, better than Julian's fake triumph. Why? Victor asked, his voice cracking. Julian shrugged, returning to his desk and sitting down. Because I can, Victor. And because it amuses me to think of you trying to survive in that ruin with your crippled leg. Now go. You're ruining the atmosphere in my company. Victor took the keys. Turning around and walking toward the door, his prosthetic foot hit the floor with every step, making a clunk, clunk sound. To Julian, this sound could have been a song of defeat. But to Victor, it was the first drumbeat of a war that was not yet over. He looked at himself in the elevator mirror. His eyes were tired, yes, but they hadn't gone out. Hollow Creek could have been a grave, but perhaps it was the first cornerstone Victor would rebuild. The road to Hollow Creek was more of a torture simulation than a journey for Victor. The regional bus left him at a nameless intersection where asphalt gave way to gravel and mud, the last remnants of civilization. As the driver opened the door, glancing at Victor's cane and limping leg, he said, "I'm not going any further, buddy," without a trace of feigned sympathy in his voice. "I'm not leaving my suspension in that pothole. You'll have to walk." Victor, left alone in the bus's exhaust fumes, looked out at the 10-kilometer expanse of muddy sea stretching before him. What would be a 2-hour walk for a strong man was like climbing Mount Everest for Victor. Every step was a calculation. His cane dug into the soft ground, his prosthetic leg sucked into the mud, pulling his stump down with every lift. The friction had already begun. The sweat and pressure inside the silicone sleeve were burning his skin. The sky had fallen on him like a gray, leaden weight. Every time the wind blew, Julian's voice echoed in his ears. "If you can make it, live there." Victor clenched his teeth. "I won't die, Julian," he whispered against the wind. "I won't die just so you can lay flowers on my grave and ease your conscience." When the village came into view, Victor was at the end of his rope. Hollow Creek was a ghost town, a place decayed by time, like Julian's soul. Collapsed roofs, porches choked by vines. Victor paused when he saw the house Julian had described, that ruin at the end of Riverbend Road. The house stood like a wounded animal stuck in a swamp. But the first thing that caught Victor's eye wasn't the architecture. It was the stairs. 7 tall, rotten wooden steps leading up to the porch. For him, 7 insurmountable walls. Victor took a deep breath. He braced his cane against the first step, lifted his good leg, and pulled his body up. The boards groaned under his weight. On the second step, his prosthesis caught, and he nearly fell. He dug his nails into the railing, splinters piercing his palms, but he didn't stop. This simple climb was more honorable than Julian's elevator ride in the plaza. When he opened the door, the air inside surprised him. He had expected the familiar, musty, mousy smell of an abandoned house. Yes, that smell was there, but something else was hidden beneath it. Burnt wood, dried lavender, and the smell of old soup? Victor limped inside, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. It was warmer inside than outside. A faint red glow seeping from the cast-iron lid of the enormous stove in the middle of the room made the shadows dance. This place isn't empty, Victor thought, his heart racing. Did Julian send me to a house that's occupied? He looked at the pile in the corner of the room, an old but clean quilt, neatly folded, half a glass of water on the table. A ghost didn't live here. A human did. Exhaustion overwhelmed him. Victor collapsed onto the long wooden bench by the window. He stretched out his leg and unlocked the prosthesis. He breathed a sigh of relief as the pressure eased. He closed his eyes, wanting just a moment's rest. He was startled by the creak of the floorboards. When he opened his eyes, he was met by a small shadow holding a flickering gas lamp. As the light drew nearer, her features became clear. An elderly woman with snow-white hair and translucent skin, her face bearing the map of time. She wore layer upon layer of shawls. Her eyes were the palest blue Victor had ever seen in his life. They seemed to gaze not at the world, but at her memories. "Who are you?" Victor asked, his voice harsher than he had intended. He went on the defensive, gripping his cane. The woman wasn't afraid. She raised the lamp a little higher, looking at Victor's face, his dirty beard, then at his prosthetic leg. But there was no disgust in her eyes, only deep sadness and then a sudden enlightenment. "Julian?" said the woman, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "Oh my God! Julian!" Victor froze. "No, The woman didn't listen to him. She put the lamp down on the table and staggered towards him. Her hands trembled. I knew you would come. You look like your father. You've changed so much." Her cold, bony fingers touched Victor's cheek. "You're wounded," she whispered, her gaze drifting to the prosthesis. "Was it in the war? The war in the city?" Victor wanted to pull away, but couldn't. The pure, unfiltered love in the woman's eyes pinned him in place. Julian's mother, Eleanor Blackwood. Hadn't Julian said she died years ago? "Mrs. Blackwood," Victor said, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm not Julian, I'm Victor." Eleanor smiled as if she hadn't heard. "Victor? Yes. Your father sometimes called you that, meaning the winner. He was a joker." She stroked his cheek. "You've grown so thin, my boy. But you're back. It doesn't matter now. I'll take care of you. I have soup." Victor had stumbled upon the greatest secret of Julian's empire of lies in this dilapidated shack, in the eyes of a forgotten mother. Julian had not only betrayed his friend, he had also buried his mother in history. The rage inside Victor shifted. He was no longer angry just for his own leg, but also for this woman's memory. The wind that rushed in when the door suddenly opened flickered the flame of the gas lamp and transformed Victor's shadow on the wall into a giant monster. The person who entered looked as harsh as the wind. A woman in her 50s, wearing a thick, military-style parka. her face resembling a canyon carved by years of harsh weather. Instead of a wicker basket, she carried a practical, heavy tool bag. "Eleanor, it's time for your medicine," the woman said, her voice authoritative. Then her gaze locked onto the stranger in the middle of the room, Victor. Her eyes scanned down like a scanner. They lingered on Victor's dirty face, his weary shoulders, and finally, the metallic line of his prosthesis visible beneath his pants. "And who are you?" She wasn't asking a question. She was demanding an answer. Eleanor rushed forward with childlike excitement. "Martha, look! He's here! Julian, my son is back!" A fleeting look of pity flashed across Martha Higgins's face, but she quickly put on her mask. "Eleanor," she said, her voice a little softer. "Again? Julian isn't coming, dear. He's too busy in his plazas." "But he's here," Eleanor pointed at Victor. "Look, he's wounded from the war. His leg, he limps like his father." Martha's gaze turned to Victor, this time without pity, filled with pure suspicion. "You," she said in an icy voice. "Who are you, and what are you doing in this defenseless woman's house?" Victor cleared his throat. The easiest thing would be to tell the truth. "I'm a homeless man sent by her son, and I'll leave." But the storm outside and the unbearable pain in his legs stopped him. One night. He only needed to stay one night. I'm Victor," he said. He wasn't good at lying, so he chose a half-truth. "I'm a distant relative. Julian, Mr. Blackwood, sent me to check on his mother." Martha raised her eyebrows. "Really? Julian Blackwood, the man who hasn't answered my calls for 5 years, suddenly sent a limping relative? And in this storm, on foot?" Martha gave Victor's muddy boots and the cane beside him a meaningful look. "It's a miracle you walked that road on that leg. You're either desperate or dangerous." Victor shouldn't underestimate the woman's intelligence. "Desperate," he said honestly. "Just for one night. I'll leave in the morning." Martha sized him up for a moment. Then she shrugged, as if deciding Victor was too exhausted to pose a threat. "Fine. But I warn you, Victor. I'm this area's nurse, repairman, and sheriff if necessary. If a single hair on Eleanor's head gets hurt, I'll break that good leg of yours." With the threat hanging in the air, Martha turned to Eleanor, took her blood pressure, and gave her medicine. She pulled a jar of homemade stew and fresh bread from her bag. "Eat. I'll be back tomorrow morning. And you," she wagged her finger at Victor, "if you're still here in the morning, I'll bring the police." After Martha left, the house fell silent. Only the crackling of the stove remained. Eleanor divided the stew into 2 bowls with trembling hands. "Don't mind her, Julian," she whispered. "Martha is tough but kind. She's trying to protect you." Victor sat down at the table. The smell of the hot food made his head spin. He picked up the spoon, took a bite, and his eyes filled with tears. This wasn't just food. It was warmth. It was home. Eleanor was watching him. In her eyes was that unfamiliar tenderness. Victor couldn't take it. Exploiting this woman's hope was no different from what Julian had done. He put down the spoon. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm not Julian, I'm—" Eleanor reached out and took his hand. Her hand was warm and dry. "Shh," she said. A momentary clarity appeared in her eyes, a spark of intelligence that lifted the veil of madness. "I know you're tired. I know you've changed. The city changes people. It changes your face, it changes your voice, but your hands are still cold, just like when you were a child." Victor fell silent. The woman was denying the truth, telling her own truth. Perhaps this lie was the only thing keeping her alive. And Victor had to be part of that lie now. Not just for the food, but so the light in this woman's eyes wouldn't go out. "Yes," said Victor, taking the weight of the lie upon his shoulders. "I've changed a lot, Mom, but I'm here." That night, lying on the divan next to the stove, Victor didn't feel the pain in his leg. The only thing he felt was a sensation he had forgotten for years, a sense of belonging. Julian had given him a ruin, but Victor had found a heart within that ruin. The dim light of dawn seeped through the wooden shutters and struck Victor's face. The smell that reached his nose transported him not to his childhood, but to those old days on the construction site. Not the smell of burnt oil and metal, but fresh coffee and toasted bread. Victor tried to sit up. He hadn't removed his prosthesis the night before, and his stump was swollen. The sharp pain that shot from his leg to his hip with his first movement reminded him where he was. Eleanor was standing by the stove, muttering to herself as she stirred something. Her movements were slow but automatic. Even if her memory had failed her, her muscles hadn't forgotten the kitchen. "Good morning, Julian," she said without turning around. "I thought it was time for your father to chop wood, but you haven't found the axe. You always lose it." Before Victor could answer, the heavy sound of an engine was heard on the muddy road in the courtyard. Martha's old pickup truck stopped in front of the house. When Martha entered, a pile of gray, coarse fabric in her hands, Victor was still at the table, rubbing his leg. "Put these on," Martha said, tossing what she was holding onto Victor's lap. "They're my husband Frank's old clothes. He was a big man, and you're skin and bones. But they're better than those city slicker clothes. At least they'll block the wind." Victor touched the clothes. A thick flannel shirt and patched work pants. Frank's scent, the smell of motor oil and tobacco, still lingered on them. "Thank you," said Victor. After checking on Eleanor, Martha called Victor out to the porch. In the morning chill, she said, "All right, Victor." Her voice less threatening than yesterday's, but still sharp. "I thought about it last night. I don't believe that bastard Julian sent you here to check up on me. That man can't even control his own shadow." She fixed her eyes on Victor. "Tell me the truth. Why are you here?" Victor leaned against the railing. He found his balance by putting weight on his good leg. He had nothing left to hide. "He sent me here to die," Victor said, his voice flat and emotionless. "After taking my job, my reputation, and my leg, he shoved these keys into my hand and said, 'If you can manage it, live there.' He thought this place was empty, that his mother was dead." Martha's face turned ashen. "He buried his mother alive. That little narcissistic devil." She took a deep breath and said, "Look, Victor, I don't care who you are. If you want to hurt that man, the best way is to stay alive and keep this woman alive." "How?" asked Victor, looking at the rotten porch boards. "This house is about to collapse on top of us. I have no tools, no money, and let's be honest, I'm not in any shape to climb up and repair the roof like I used to." "You're an engineer, aren't you?" "Use your head," said Martha. "You need to go to Silas for tools. He lives in the old mill down the hill. He's a grumpy old man, but his shed is like a hardware store. Tell him I sent you." Then she looked at Victor's leg. "And Victor, there'll be an old cane in Frank's workshop with a nail on the end. It's driving me crazy watching you slip around in this mud with that metal rod. I'll bring it too." Silas's mill was like a graveyard of rusted gears and piles of scrap metal. Silas sat on a tin barrel, wearing an oil-stained overalls. When Victor limped closer, Silas squinted at him. So you're the city limp Martha mentioned, Silas said, his voice gravelly. Victor ignored the nickname. I need tools, Silas. A hammer, a saw, nails, whatever you have. Silas laughed, showing his yellow teeth. Free cheese is only in a mousetrap, son. Got any money? No, said Victor. But I have my hands. Silas gave Victor's prosthetic a meaningful look. You have your hands, but how long can you stand? Look at that porch, he said, pointing to the sagging roof on the side of the mill. The wind brought it down last month. Help me lift it, and I'll get you the tools. This was a test. Victor looked at the porch. Heavy beams, a complex balance. Half a day's work for a strong man. For Victor, a challenge. Leverage, said Victor, scanning the porch with an engineer's eye. We'll lift it with leverage, not strength. Give me 2 sturdy logs and a rope. Silas was surprised. Victor compensated for his lack of physical strength with his intelligence. They worked until evening that day. Victor gave Silas instructions, tied the ropes himself, and calculated the leverage points. By evening, the porch was in place, and every muscle in Victor's body ached, but he had his toolbox in hand. When he returned home, Eleanor was waiting for him on the porch. When Victor walked through the door, carrying a heavy toolbox and wearing Frank's oversized clothes, Eleanor smiled. I knew it, she said. I knew you'd find your father's tools. The man of the house is back. Victor set the toolbox down on the ground. The metallic clang inside it sounded sweeter to him than the sterile silence of the apex tower. He was no longer Julian's victim. He was the master of this ruin. In Hollow Creek, time was measured not by the flickering digits of digital clocks in the city, but by the intensity of the pain in Victor's back and the angle of the sun beating down on the roof tiles. Victor had set aside his engineering degree and embraced his survival instinct. Repairing the roof was dangerous even for a strong man. For Victor, it was a strategic battle. He placed his left leg, his good leg, on each step of the ladder first, then dragged his right leg, that lifeless pile of metal and plastic, behind him. Once on the roof, his prosthesis couldn't grip the slippery tiles, so he had secured the climbing rope tied around his waist to the chimney. To someone watching from below, he might have looked like an amateur tightrope walker. But with every knot, every nail, Victor was rebuilding his life. In the evenings, when the warmth of the stove filled the room, the ache in Victor's leg gave way to a weary calm. Eleanor sat in her rocking chair, knitting something shapeless with her needles. Julian, she said one evening, without looking up from her knitting, do you remember that dam? The one you built with Victor by the riverbank? Victor paused with the wooden spoon in his hand. The dam? Yes, said Eleanor, smiling. You wanted to change the flow of the river. You carried the big stones and Victor told you where to put them. You can't fight water, Julian. You redirect it, he said back then. He was only 10 years old, but he spoke like a grown man. Victor's throat tightened. He remembered that day. Julian was impatient, throwing the stones randomly. Victor was trying to calculate the water pressure. In the end, Julian got bored and left, and Victor finished the dam alone. But at dinner that night, Julian told everyone, I built the dam, just like at work, just like in life. Victor was a good boy, Eleanor continued, but you never mention him in your letters. Why, son? Did you leave him behind? Victor froze. Which letters, Mom? Eleanor pulled a stack of envelopes from the drawer of the side table next to her. The letters you send every month. Victor took one with trembling hands. There was no postmark on the envelope. He opened the paper. The writing didn't resemble Julian's sharp, aggressive handwriting. It was rounder, more orderly. It was Martha's writing. The letters were filled with fictional success stories written from Julian's perspective. "The company is growing, Mom. Everyone's talking about me, Mom." But there wasn't a single word from Victor. Martha knew Julian's selfishness so well that even in the fake letters, she had portrayed him as someone who only talked about himself. "Are you angry with him?" Eleanor asked, a reproach in her voice. "Victor was your anchor. You were the kite. He was the string. Without the string, the kite disappears, Julian." "He's gone, Mom," said Victor, his voice low. "Victor is gone." Eleanor sighed. "Maybe you're not looking for him." The next day, when Victor went upstairs to insulate the attic, he found that album in a dusty box. A faded velvet album. He turned the pages. Julian as a baby, Eleanor as a young woman. And then that photograph. A black and white square with curled edges. 2 children sitting on a tree stump. The child on the left, Julian, looked at the camera with that overly confident, cocky smile of his. The child on the right, Victor, was a little shy, but his eyes were shining. And most importantly, Victor had both legs. There was no pile of metal hidden under his pants. He was a whole child who could run and climb. Victor touched the photo. His fingertip rests on his own right leg in the photo. At that moment, he feels a mental pain sharper than physical pain. Julian hadn't just stolen his future. Julian had betrayed Victor's past wholeness, his innocence. One of those 2 children in the photo had pushed the other over the edge. "Victor," he whispers to himself, "I'll pull you out from under that wreckage. I swear." From below came the sound of Eleanor's cough, a dry, raspy, prolonged cough. Victor closed the album. He had to face the ghosts of the past, but the reality of the present, of a sick and elderly woman, was more urgent. Towards the end of November, Hollow Creek was cloaked in a gray hue, as if the sky had descended to earth. The rains fell relentlessly for days, like a monster devouring the earth. The dampness inside the house seeped into Victor's bones, especially the nerves at the tip of his severed leg, which throbbed as if scorched by fire. But his main concern was not himself, but Eleanor. Eleanor's cough had gone from a dry rasp to suffocating fits that tore at her lungs. Martha's face was grim when she finally reached the house that day, struggling through the mud-choked road in her Jeep. "Pneumonia," she said, hanging her stethoscope around her neck. "And her heart? Her heart can't handle this load, Victor. She has to go to the hospital, but the main road is flooded. It's impossible for us to reach the county seat." That night, the sky split open. The wind howled in the chimney. The wooden frame of the house groaned. Victor was keeping watch at Eleanor's bedside when he was startled by the sound of water dripping from the ceiling. Drip, drip, drip. The drops were falling right at the foot of Eleanor's bed. "Damn it," said Victor. One of the patches he had made on the roof must have failed. He grabbed the gas lamp. The stairs leading up to the attic were steep and narrow. It was difficult even for a strong person. But for Victor, this climb was a feat of acrobatics. He gripped the railing with his right hand, swung his left leg up, then dragged his prosthetic foot onto the step and pulled himself up. With every step, the prosthetic slipped, and Victor gritted his teeth to keep from falling. When he climbed into the attic, the howling wind deafened his ears. The old tiles on the eastern corner of the roof had blown off, and rain was pouring in. Water was seeping down through cracks in the floor. Victor looked around for something to plug the hole. In the corner stood the heavy oak chest where he had found the album the day before. If I pull it over the hole, I can stop the water, he thought. He dropped his cane. He grabbed the chest with both hands. Come on, he growled. He pushed with his good leg. The chest was heavy, the floor slippery. When Victor pushed with all his might, his prosthetic leg slipped on the slippery floor. He lost his balance and fell hard on his knees, one flesh, one metal. The pain clouded his eyes, but he didn't stop. He managed to push the chest over the hole. Lying breathless on the floor, he noticed a floorboard that had shifted as the chest was dragged across the floor. Underneath the board, hidden in the dark space between the joists, was a matte black metal briefcase. Dusty, covered in cobwebs, but locked. Victor succumbed to his curiosity. He pulled out the briefcase. The lock was rusted. It opened with a single tap of his screwdriver. There was no money inside. Inside was a map of Julian's empire. Victor began examining the papers. They were construction reports for the Apex Tower, but they weren't the reports Victor had approved. These were the revised versions. Documents showing that Victor's signature had been forged, that safety protocols had been canceled to cut costs. And at the bottom, a printout of an email that took Victor's breath away. To Site Manager. From Julian Blackwood. Subject: regarding the accident report. Victor will be made to look like he violated the safety protocols himself. The collapse of that scaffold will be the tragic accident we need to convince the insurance company. Don't feel sorry for him. He's just a blind man focused on his job. We must sacrifice the pawn to save the king. It's sad he lost his leg, but it's better than the company going under. Victor crumpled the paper in his hand. A volcanic rage erupted in his chest. Julian hadn't just stolen his money. Julian had deliberately allowed the pier to collapse that day, allowing Victor's leg to be crushed under concrete blocks. He wasn't his friend. He was his executioner. From below came a scream that drowned out the roar of the storm. Eleanor. Victor froze, holding the confession of the man who had ruined his life, while below, that man's dying mother lay beneath the dark ceiling. Revenge was at his fingertips. But humanity was down there, beside that woman coughing as if she were drowning. When the first light of morning revealed the storm's wreckage, Victor was sitting at the kitchen table. Before him lay the evidence of Julian's betrayal. Beside him, a cold coffee. From below came Eleanor's wheezing breath. Each breath seemed a battle for the last crumbs of air in her lungs. When Martha entered the door, soaking wet, Victor looked up. The expression on her face said it all. There was no way out, no hope. The Jeep got stuck in the mud, Martha said, removing her gloves. I walked here. How is Eleanor? Bad, Victor said. She's delirious. She's confusing you with me. After checking on Eleanor, Martha returned to the kitchen, her shoulders slumped. I don't have enough penicillin, Victor. She needs oxygen, intensive care. If we can't get her to the hospital today. She didn't finish her sentence. Victor placed his hand on the black metal case. We'll make it, he said. Julian will pick her up. Martha frowned. Julian. That man wouldn't lift a finger for his own mother. The phones are down. We can't even reach him. Victor opened the bag and pushed the email in front of Martha. Not for his mother, Victor said, his voice cold as ice. He'll do it for himself. Martha read the paper. Her eyes widened, her face flushed with anger. This is despicable. Your leg, on purpose. Yes, said Victor. He crippled me, took my money. Now it's his freedom. But first we need a helicopter. The radio, Martha said with military resolve. There's a long-range radio at Big Gus's cabin across the river, but the river's flooded, Victor. That bridge is long gone. We'll have to walk across. Her gaze drifted to Victor's leg. You can't stand in that water with that metal. The current will sweep you away like a piece of straw. Victor stood up. He gripped his cane. Then you'll have to hold me, Martha, because that woman isn't going to die today. The journey was the greatest physical battle Victor had ever faced in his life. The forest floor had turned into a swamp that sucked him in with every step. He probed the ground with his good leg, then planted his prosthetic. But the real nightmare began at the riverbank. The water was murky, angry, and ice-cold. "Get my arm!" Martha yelled, trying to drown out the roar of the water. They entered the water. The cold stabbed into the socket of Victor's prosthetic leg like a knife. The current pounded against his legs. By the time they reached the middle of the river, the water level was up to their waists. Victor felt his prosthetic leg lighten, lifted off the ground by the water's buoyancy. He was losing his balance. "Victor!" Martha grabbed him by the collar of his parka. "Step down. Put your weight on it." "I can't feel it," Victor shouted. "My leg isn't touching the ground." Martha pulled him toward her, almost dragging him to the shallows, to the opposite bank. Victor fell into the mud, his lungs burning. His leg was in place, but the silicone sleeve was filled with water and had become heavy. When they reached Gus's cabin, both of them were shivering. Gus let them in without question. When Victor took the radio, his hands were still shaking, but his voice was steady. It didn't take long to find the apex tower's frequency. The secretary's voice came through the static. "Connect me to Julian Blackwood. Immediately." Subject: King and Pawn. Minutes later, Julian's voice came through, calm, in that sterile tone from his office. "Who are you? How did you find this frequency?" "I'm the man who crawled out from under that wreckage, Julian," said Victor. "And I have the email in my hand where you gave the order to collapse that pier." There was deathly silence on the other end of the line. "Victor?" Julian's voice changed. It became shaky, defensive. "You... What are you talking about?" "Listen," Victor said, without wasting time. "Your mother is alive, here in the ruins you sent me to, and she's dying. Pneumonia." "No. She's dead." "She's not dead, Julian. You abandoned her. Now, listen to me carefully. Within 3 hours, you will land a fully equipped ambulance helicopter here in Hollow Creek. You will take your mother to the best hospital. If that helicopter doesn't arrive, these documents and that email will be on the prosecutor's desk first thing in the morning. Attempted murder, Julian. Not fraud. Murder." "You can't do this," Julian hissed. "We had a deal." "The deal is off," Victor said. "Checkmate, Julian. Send the helicopter, or your empire will collapse like that pier." He hung up the radio. Gus and Martha looked at him. "Will he come?" Martha asked anxiously. Victor looked out the window at the gray sky. "He'll come," he said. "Not for his mother. He'll come for his own skin." The journey back from Gus's cabin was less a physical ordeal for Victor than a mental fog. His leg had gone completely numb after that damn river crossing. It felt as if not just his prosthesis, but his entire right side had turned into a dead tree branch. Martha never left his side for a moment. She supported him by the shoulder when he stumbled, made him stop and wait when his breath caught. Neither of them spoke. Everything that needed to be said had already been said on that radio, in Julian's fearful silence. When they reached the house, they found Eleanor still alive but teetering on the edge of consciousness. Her breaths were so shallow, that you had to look closely to see her chest rise and fall. Victor took off his wet parka and threw it by the stove. His shivering wasn't from the cold, but from the adrenaline wearing off. The waiting began. As minutes stretched into hours, there was no sound except the howling wind outside. Victor stood by the window, the black metal case in his hand, his eyes watching the dark sky. Was Julian bluffing? Or was his own freedom more valuable than his mother's life? And then the sound was heard. At first, like the distant buzzing of a bee, then a rhythmic rumble that tore through the sky and shook the foundations of the house. "It's here," Martha said, rushing to the window. "The bastard really sent it." Victor went outside. A massive black helicopter was descending, slicing through the gray clouds above Hollow Creek. The wind created by the rotors was strong enough to knock down the rotten fences in the garden. Victor braced himself against the wind, leaning heavily on his cane. This machine belonged to Julian's world, loud, powerful, and oppressive. But this time, it had come at Victor's command. When the helicopter landed in the field, 3 fully equipped paramedics burst out. Their neon orange uniforms glowed like foreign objects in the grayness of this faded town. They ran into the house. Victor stopped at the doorway, not entering. He did not belong in their world, that sterile, fast, mechanical realm of intervention. He watched the commotion inside, the medical orders being given, the hissing of the oxygen mask from a distance. He felt less like a director and more like an old actor pushed into the wings. He was just the limping man. Julian would be the charitable benefactor who sent the helicopter in the records. When they carried her out on the stretcher, Eleanor's face looked tiny beneath the oxygen mask. She opened her eyes under the helicopter's spotlight. Amid the crowd, the noise and the chaos, her gaze found Victor. There was no fear in those pale blue eyes, only a question. Victor limped toward the stretcher. He bent down and held her ice-cold hand. "Don't be afraid, Mom," he shouted over the roar of the rotors. "They'll fix you up. Julian is waiting for you." That last lie burned in Victor's throat. Eleanor shook her head slightly, her eyes closed. The paramedics quickly loaded the stretcher into the helicopter. The doors closed, the engine roared, and the metal bird took flight. It vanished into the night, leaving behind only crushed grass and a deep silence. "She's gone," said Martha, coming to Victor's side. "You saved her, Victor. If you hadn't blackmailed him, she wouldn't have made it through the night." Victor squeezed the black bag in his hand. "It's not over, Martha. This was only the first half. Julian saved his mother, yes. But now he'll use everything he has to destroy me. That helicopter won't be coming back, but his lawyers will." Martha smiled despite her muddy boots and tired face. It was that tough, sheriff smile. "Then it's time to call my cousin Jason. He's a sharp lawyer who hates the city and the system. He hates guys like Julian Blackwood as much as you and I do." The next morning, they set off for the city in Martha's Jeep. Victor stretched his legs out on the back seat, watching the scenery flow by outside the window. The forest gave way to suburbs, and the suburbs gave way to concrete blocks. The city. The monster that had chewed him up and spat him out, taking his leg and his honor. Now he was returning to the monster's belly, but this time not to be swallowed, but to tear it apart from within. Jason's office was the complete opposite of the Apex Tower. It was a chaotic place in the basement of an old building, filled with piles of files. Jason was an energetic man in his 30s, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. When Victor placed the metal briefcase and its contents on the desk, Jason's brow furrowed. Then his eyes lit up. "Wow," Jason said, whistling. "This isn't just a fraud case, buddy. This is the complete list of nails to be hammered into Julian Blackwood's coffin. Accident reports, fake security protocols. They've basically sent you to your death. While Jason was reviewing the documents, Victor went to the window. He watched the people walking down the street. They were all moving so fast. They had 2 legs and didn't even think about it. "They'll call me crazy," Victor said, looking at his tired reflection in the glass. "Julian's lawyers, they'll say I'm an unstable, vengeful, disabled former employee. They'll even claim I made up that email." Jason looked up. Let them attack. Let them use whatever power they have. Because there's one thing they've forgotten, Victor. You've already lost everything. There's no witness more dangerous than a man with nothing left to lose. Victor turned to Jason. He leaned on his cane and, for the first time, felt truly upright. "I don't want to testify, Jason," Victor said firmly. "I want to be the plaintiff, not just for my leg, for that woman left to rot in the attic, and for everyone Julian crushed by calling them pawns." Jason smiled and slammed the file shut. "Then let's begin, Victor. Let's dig up the battle axes from where they're buried." When the legal proceedings began, Julian did not remain silent, as expected. He hired the most expensive law firm in town. Their strategy was ruthless. They leaked to the press that Victor had suffered post-traumatic stress after the accident, was addicted to painkillers, and that these documents were nothing more than his delusions. Headlines like, "Is he slandering his old engineer friend?" began appearing in newspapers. But Victor had become immune after that stormy night in Hollow Creek. The newspaper headlines were no colder than the icy water in the river. He was no longer Julian's victim, but his nightmare. The legal battle in the city was bloodier and dirtier than Victor had expected. Julian's lawyers had turned the courtroom into a theater stage. It was claimed that the email printout Victor presented could have been digitally manipulated, and it was suggested that Victor's perception of reality was distorted due to the heavy painkillers he used after the accident. The newspapers were polishing Julian's image as the heroic businessman who rescued his mother by helicopter, while labeling Victor a jealous and crippled former employee. Victor sat in the leather chair in Jason's office, rubbing his prosthetic leg. The stress triggered phantom pains in his stump. "We're hitting a wall, Victor," Jason said, tugging at his tie. "We can't access the original record of that email on the server. They deleted it. The scrap of paper we have might not be enough for the jury. We need something more concrete, something undeniable, something with a wet signature." That evening, Victor's phone rang in his cheap motel room. The number was unknown. "Hello, Victor?" said a woman's voice with the familiar beeping sounds of hospital equipment in the background. "This is Nurse Sarah. I'm in charge of Mrs. Eleanor's care. I know it's forbidden, but I had to call you." Victor sat up. "Is something wrong? How is she?" "Physically, she's improving, but mentally, she's constantly rambling, especially at night. She says, 'Blue velvet.' Julian's lies are under the velvet, and she keeps repeating, 'The bottom of the chest, the bottom of the lie.' The doctors say it's dementia, but he's so insistent." A lightning bolt struck Victor's mind. That heavy oak chest in the attic, lined with velvet. Blue velvet. "Thank you, Sarah," Victor said. Tell him his son is coming home." The next morning, he was on the road to Hollow Creek before dawn. This time he was alone. While Jason stalled in court, Victor had to find that evidence. When he got home, the feeling of abandonment was even heavier. Eleanor was gone. The kitchen was cold. The house was just a skeleton now. Victor headed straight for the attic without wasting any time. Climbing the stairs was easier, despite the pain in his leg, because this time he was climbing not out of fear, but out of anger. The attic was dusty and silent, just as he had left it. The trunk stood over the hole. Victor threw his cane to the floor and crouched down beside the trunk. His prosthetic leg hit the wooden floor hard, but he didn't care. He opened the lid. He threw out the baby clothes and old blankets inside with a rush. The bottom of the chest was covered in navy blue velvet. Victor ran his fingers along the edges of the velvet. In the corner there was an almost invisible stitching error. He ran his fingernail over it and pulled. The floor didn't budge. "Come on," he whispered. He took his pocket knife out and ripped the velvet. There was a wooden plate underneath, but a tiny finger hole was hidden at the edge. Victor stuck his finger in and pulled. The fake bottom lifted like a lid. Victor's breath caught. Julian's backup plan was here. Not just documents related to Victor's case. Records of bribes Julian had given to city council members to acquire the land for the Apex Tower. Wet-inked incorporation documents for shell companies. And that original waiver with Victor's forged signature. It was all here. Julian had used this house not as a dump, but as a safe. He had made his mother the guardian of that vault. But at the bottom of the documents, there was something else that tugged at Victor's heart. An old, leather-bound notebook. Its cover bore the silver letters Julian B. Victor opened the notebook. The dates were from 20 years ago. Julian's high school diary. He turned the pages. It was clear that Julian was ambitious even back then. But between the lines, there was another child. May 12th. Today, Victor and I drew our bridge project. He's very smart. He's better at math than me. When my dad called me clumsy, so Victor defended me. One day we'll build that tower, and there will be 2 chairs in the office at the top. One for me, one for him. We'll never part. Victor watched a tear fall from his eye onto the words, "We'll never part." The ink smudged slightly. Julian hadn't just betrayed Victor. Julian had also betrayed the boy who wrote those lines, his own youth. Victor closed the notebook. The last shred of mercy inside him vanished in that moment. Julian Blackwood had killed that innocent child years ago. Now what Victor had to do was not murder, but burial. He had to bury that dead child and the monster he had created. He stuffed the documents and the diary into the metal case. As he stood up, his prosthesis creaked. That sound no longer caused him pain. It was the sound of an approaching storm, the footsteps of justice. The courtroom was as cold and sterile as the lobby of the Apex Tower. The air hung heavy with expensive cologne, old wood polish, and the metallic scent of tension. Julian sat at the defense table with the air of an unapproachable emperor. His lawyers smiled with the arrogance of having shattered Victor's credibility. Victor, meanwhile, held his prosthetic leg steady to keep it from creaking, gripping the cold handle of the metal briefcase in his hand. This briefcase was filled not only with papers, but with Julian's soul. When it was the plaintiff's turn, Jason stood up. The usual disheveled lawyer was gone, replaced by a gladiator. "Your Honor," said Jason, his voice echoing in the courtroom's acoustics. "We present the original documents, seized from a secret compartment in the defendant's mother's house, bearing wet signatures, and also a diary kept in the defendant's own handwriting." When the documents were placed before the judge, the courtroom fell deathly silent. The confident mask on Julian's face cracked, replaced by a horror-stricken pallor. After examining the documents, the judge opened the diary and began reading aloud. "One day we will build that tower. And there will be 2 chairs in the office at the very top. One for me, one for him. We will never part. This sentence had a bigger impact than a bomb in the room. Julian suddenly jumped up, his chair crashing noisily to the floor. "He stole that diary! It's mine!" he shouted, his voice cracking. He had lost control. "You ruined everything, Victor! You came into my life with that damn leg of yours and destroyed everything!" Victor slowly stood up, leaning on his cane. For the first time, he looked Julian straight in the eye, not down at him. "I didn't destroy it, Julian," Victor said, his voice calm but each word heavy as a sledgehammer. "The day you let that pier collapse, you already destroyed that 2-chair office. I'm just cleaning up the wreckage." The verdict was inevitable. When Julian Blackwood was handcuffed on charges of fraud, bribery, and attempted murder, Victor felt not triumph, but deep exhaustion. Julian didn't even look back as he was led away. That childhood friend, that diary's author, had long since died. The one leaving was just a stranger. As they left the courthouse, a light spring rain was falling. Jason took a deep breath. "It's over," he said. "With your settlement, you could even buy that tower, Victor. You could make a spectacular return to the city." Victor let the rain wash over his face. He looked at the city's noise, the honking horns, the people rushing about. They were all trying to get somewhere, but none of them were getting there. "No," said Victor. "I'm going home, Jason. This place is just concrete and noise to me." When Victor returned to Hollow Creek, the ruin Julian had told him to live there if you can was gone. Victor spent most of his compensation money transforming the town. But this was no ordinary restoration. Drawing on his own experience, Victor transformed Hollow Creek into an accessible sanctuary for people with physical and emotional wounds. He built wheelchair-accessible ramps, audio and tactile trails for the visually impaired, and quiet meditation gardens for those experiencing post-traumatic stress. Silas had given up drinking and was now running the workshop. He produced special furniture and prosthetic parts for disabled individuals. Martha managed the town's rehabilitation center. Eleanor. She spent the last 2 years of her life peacefully in the room Victor had specially designed for her, with a view of the river from the window. Victor visited her every day. Until her last breath, Eleanor believed he was Julian. And Victor, by not revealing the truth, gave her the greatest gift he could. Eyes closed with the love of a son. Years passed like water. One autumn morning, an anonymous envelope was left in the town's mailbox. Inside the envelope was a large check for the town's newly built disabled park and a short note. "The second seat will always remain empty." There was no signature, but Victor recognized the handwriting. Julian had been released from prison. Broken, having lost everything, but perhaps having found his humanity for the first time. He used the check for the Eleanor Blackwood Memorial to be erected at the park's entrance. That evening, Victor and Martha were sitting on the pier by the river. The sun was setting behind the forest, painting the sky purple and orange. Victor had removed his prosthesis and stretched his leg into the cool water. The pain was gone. Phantom pains had given way to real peace. "I've been thinking," said Victor, holding Martha's hand. "When Julian gave me those rusty keys, I thought my life was over. It turns out he gave me not just the keys to a house, but the keys to myself." Martha rested her head on his shoulder. "Fate has a strange sense of humor, engineer. To make you walk, it first took your leg, then gave you wings." The lights in the town began to come on one by one. Victor looked back at the accessible, peaceful world he had created. This was supposed to be Julian's hell, but it had become Victor's heaven. He had come here as an old, crippled engineer, but now he was a whole man. Because he knew that what keeps a person standing is not bones and muscles, but purpose and love. And Victor had the strongest foundation in the world. I am truly happy to be here and to share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm very curious to know where everyone is joining from. With love and respect.